Welcome back to another video on advanced Python course. Today we are going to discuss Pydantic. In Python there are many static code analysis tools. For example, mypy, pylint, flake8, etc. These tools are good, but they don't guard against invalid data that might come in during runtime. So for example, during runtime, your code may receive data from, let's say, database or configuration files, or you might get the data from API requests, etc. And that data might be invalid, or there is a risk that these data we receive from these databases or network files or network requests, that data may be invalid. So what do we do here? So we may think that, okay, we'll just put some validation logic and check each and every data, and only then we'll use that data. But slowly, like putting all this logic or putting all this validation logic will become nightmare, because we may have many data types, and each, for example, each class may have multiple attributes, and checking each and every attribute or data is difficult. What do we do here? That's where Pydantic comes to rescue. Now, before going and understanding Pydantic in detail, let's take an example. So here in this code, you see here, let me just remove Pydantic, because we are not going to use Pydantic right away. So I have I have a main class called branch, and this branch is basically is going to hold the company name and the location of the branch and the branch ID and employees. As you can see, I have put type int for each and every attribute here, and I am also using a name tuple from typing. I could have used data classes, but just for example, I'm using name tuple, and this says that these are user defined classes. These are defined, or these class builders are going to be used to hold some data. So as you can see here, they are designed to hold the data, and we have type hint for each of these variable. Now if I want to load data to this branch class, so I have this data in a YAML file. As you can see here, I have written down the company name, and you can think of this YAML file as your configuration. And once you have this data with you, you can simply import it to your Python environment, and then just pass this data as keyword arguments to this branch class. So that's what I'm trying to do here. So if, for example, if I run this code, I get a branch instance, and it holds the company name, the location of the company, or the location of the branch, and it also holds the branch ID. Employees are list of dictionaries. There are 2 employees right now, and we also have the payment information and account information and everything. So this as you can see here, this is quite a lot of code, and this we have many attributes for each of these object or class object here. And this is a simple way of achieving this, or building this branch class and loading this data. This is very simple way. Now there is a lot of problem here. For users, this code may look really nice, because we have type int and it's easy for them to understand. This is all okay, but what happens if I input some wrong data, right? For example, let's say here in in this YAML file, I know that what type of data this code is expecting, and I might put in all the correct data. But by mistake, for example, if I pass in, let's say, 24 as a string, the branch ID has to be integer, as you can see here. So the branch ID is supposed to be int, but if I pass in as a string and run the code, it still works. And as you can see here, it shows branch ID, it is a string now. So this is a bug. And what should we do? I mean, we should put some kind of checking or validation logic to this branch ID. And it's not the only one here. We have many of these attributes, and we have to write validation logic to each and every one of them. That's going to be very difficult. So what are we going to do? This is where we are going to use the Pydantic. Now let's see how we can use Pydantic to solve this issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear all this code. and I'm going to add in, or I'm going to import something called base model from Pydantic. And now, as you can see, like before, I was using name tuple. I was using the parent class in each of these user-defined classes as name tuple. Now I am using base model, and this base model is imported from Pydantic. Now we can see all the magic. So I'm going to change this to back to an integer, and everything is similar. Everything else is same except I am instead of name tuple, I am using Pydantic's base model. Now, if I run this code, okay, it's showing an error because I don't have YAML imported. Okay, let me just clear the screen, and if I run this, now as you can see, again we got the same object, which is let me rerun it. It's not clear. Uh, so there is some yeah. So this object is similar to what we had before. Now, but it is doing all the validation right now. Now, for example, if I go back here and let's say change this to string, so what happens is that if I do that, if I run this, then it's going to say uh, this. If you see this branch ID, even though I have in the ML file as a string, it automatically converted into integer, right? So this is some kind of this is some kind of parsing. So for example, it checks, okay, branch ID has to be an integer. If I get a string, I'm just going to convert it to an integer, close integer, whatever it could be. If it is float, I'm going to convert it into an integer, right? So this way, it's going to do all the parsing for you, right? And this all happens during runtime. As you can see, I'm passing in the data, and all these changes are happening at runtime, right? This is a wonderful thing about Pydantic. Now, as you can see, we didn't lose much of the readability of the code because the code is almost similar to like what we had before using the name tuple idea, except that we are now just using base model instead of name tuple. So with minimal amount of changes in code or without losing any readability of the code, we have achieved this validation of our types. Now there is an other way to use the Pydantic using like a data class way. Like for example, I can delete all of this. So here, what I'm doing is instead of using the base model from Pydantic as your parent class, I can import Pydantic.data classes, the data class from Pydantic.data classes like this, and just add in that decorator, right? So if I add the decorator, everything is going to be same. Like things are going to work like before. Like if I run this, as you can see here, it's exactly same. We have the branch instance and everything else is same. Like even here, if I since even here I have a 24 string, but Pydantic knows that it has to be an integer, so it converts it to an integer. So this is the parsing we talked about before. And similarly, you can also provide optional and default values. Like for example, here I can say in the location here, I can say default is let's say Spain. This will work. If I don't provide any value to this country, it's going to use this as a default value. And there are like some hiccups on what kind of default values you should use. Like for example, you should not use mutable objects and so on, similar to like what we have in data classes. So we are going to come to that later, but you're going to provide optional values in default values, just like in any other class builders. Now, this is all really good. It's doing the parsing really well, and it is checking the types and then automatically converting into those particular types and so on. We will see some of the disadvantages of doing this right away. Like the code, as soon as you provide the data, it's going to parse it and then give you the data. But what if you want to do some validation before this parsing happens? All those questions we'll answer later. Now let's see what are the different type of validation is available in Pydantic. So there are two different validators. So one is built-in validators. which you can just import from Pydantic and then use them in your code. And there are you can write your own custom validators, which we'll see after the inbuilt validators. So like I said, Pydantic has a ton of built-in validators, and we'll see that there are field. There is something called field, which we'll see how to use them, and these inbuilt validators help you in, for example, limiting the length of the string, for example, or strictly saying this attribute should have positive numbers or negative numbers and so on. So let's take an example. We are going to so I'm going to delete all of this code, and now here the way we use built-in validators is by using this field, this function called field. So this field, we can add it to any attribute. So here, for example, I'm adding it to an account number attribute, and I'm saying the minimum length of the account number should be 8 characters, and maximum can be 10 characters. So in this YAML file, I have here 8 characters. So if I, for example, run this code, it will work. It will not throw any error. So as soon as I change this to let's say 7, it's going to catch that and throws an error. It says ensure value has at least 8 characters. So if I go back and change it and save it, and if I come here and just clear the screen, and if I run this, it's going to run again, and it's going to work again. Right? That is one. And the second one, I am adding the inbuilt validator is to this branch ID here. So in this branch ID, I'm saying it's an integer, but it should be greater than 1 but less than 100, right? Like for example, if I for example here I have it as a 24, I'm going to change it to 24, and if I run this, it will work because it is in between that range. As soon as I change it to, let's say, 124, and if I run this code, it says an error because it has to be less than 100. Right. So this is another use of field or inbuilt validator. So like this, you can think of all the type of validations you want to put on your attributes in your code, and then easily use these inbuilt attributes for your use case. I mean, there are other ways of adding the validators as well. Like there is if you want to strictly keep your if you strictly keep your variable or an attribute to have only positive integer, you can use something like this. From Pydantic, you can import positive int and just add that to your to this code. So there are other ways also, but field is the main inbuilt validator for your attributes. This is about the inbuilt attributes or inbuilt validators. Now we'll look into some of the custom validators. So to build a custom validators, so you will have to from Pydantic you have to import validator like this. And now let's say I want to validate. Let's say I want to check if the employees list has at least one management person. So what I'm trying to say is, let's say in your code, it is necessary or it is mandatory that at least one of the employees should be in the management. That means in a particular branch there has to be one person in the management, and all other person can be any other department. Like in this case here, we have departments which are of 5, and one is management department, another is accounting department, or accounting department, sales, R&D, HR, and we are saying that employees are going to be inheriting, or employees going to be using this department class. Sorry about that. So we have to make sure that at least one employee is in management. So if that is my use case, so what I can do is I can write my custom validator. So the way we do it is by adding this validator as a decorator to a validation function. Like for example, here I am creating a validation function called validate employees. It's a class method, and it takes this employees object, and we check in if each of these employees, or check every employee, and if any of the employees is in management, we return the employees. If not, we are going to throw in value error. So and say one person has to be in management, right? And as you can see, this validator is decorator, and whatever attribute we want to validate, that has to come as an argument to this validator decorator. Now, if I save this and run, as you can see here in my data in the branch.yaml file, I don't have anyone in the management. We have only two employees here, and one is in R&D and one is in sales, and I don't have anyone in management. So if I run this, it should throw an error. So as you can see here, it says must have one person in management. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change, for example, let's say Peter Griffin to management. If I do that, and if I run this code now, it should not throw any error. As you can see here, since we have one person in management, so it's not a problem now. So this is about custom validators. So you can think of new ways you want to add these custom validators to your code, or if you are building a code base for your projects, you can think of these new ways you want to add these validators or restrictions to your code, and then come up with these functions, and then use this validator decorator to achieve this. So this is a really nice feature. So we have inbuilt validators, and we also have custom validators. So both are really nice. Now, like I mentioned before, what happens is when we create this kind of object, or we create this type of code and run them, first Pydantic is going to take the data, does the parsing, and then applies the validators. Like for example here, like I said before, so for example, if here a branch, I am I am converting the data into integer first, and then I'm applying the field or validation. Same thing happens here. So first the data for the employees will be taken, and all the parsing happens, and then the validators will be run. So when I say parsing, so if for example here for branch ID, if I send in string, it's going to convert into an integer. That's the parsing part. And right after that, it's going to do the validation. Now, let's say you want the opposite. So you don't want the parsing to run first. You want the validation to happen first, and then only the parsing. So in that case, you can, I'm not going to show an example with the branch class I had written. I'm going to show it with a simple example like this. So here I'm creating a model class, and I'm using base model base model from Pydantic, and I just have one attribute called names, and it's a list of strings. So all I want is I want to make sure this model holds a list of strings or list of names, and what I want to do is I want to check if before we run the Pydantic parser, I want to check if the data I am passing in is a string or not. For example, here, if the instance of names is a string, if it is a string, then I'm going to uh, split the string into list, and the splitting happens at the space level. So if, for example, I might send in Raj, Ram, Rai like this, without any space, with space, and I know that these are names. So instead of passing in list of strings, I am passing in just a string. So I have to check that before we do the parsing. I have to check it and split and then return that. So what happens is if I mention pre equal to true, so the Pydantic is going to first run the validator. It's going to receive a names, which is a string right now, and splits, and whatever I get is the list of strings, and that will be given to these names, and then the parsing happens. So for example, if I, for example, make it as let me just run this and see what happens. So if I clear this, and if I run this code, my code or my model here will hold the strings or list of strings like this. So just to understand, I have here, I am, so just to explain, just to understand here, I'm using pre equal to true, and since I'm using pre equal to true, the validation runs first. So if you want to make sure that is actually happening, let's just see what happens if I make it as a list of integers. So what should happen is this validator should run, and then I get the list of strings, and those list of strings will get converted to list of integers. If I run this, um, okay, I get an error because yeah. So what happens is when the validation or during parsing, Pydantic tries to see if it can actually convert that string into an integer or a float into an integer. If it can do it, like for example, if it's like a string of 36, that can be converted. But if it is like a names or something, then that will not work. So that's when you get this error. So this is not a good example, but anyway, I think I hope you got the idea. So I mean, what happens is that this pre-runs, if you mention pre-coded true, validation runs first, and then only the the parsing happens. So this is all about Pydantic. I also have another other simple a point, which is we can actually save these save these Pydantic models. So you can copy into a dictionary, or you can copy into a JSON, or you can save it in pickle format and so on. Those are very easy, and you can check them online, like how to do it. So it's very simple, like model.json to convert it to JSON, or model.pickle to convert it to pickle format and so on. So hope you guys learned something. This Pydantic is a really nice idea. I think if you are building some large if you are building a large code for your project, I think you should definitely use this. It's a really good good package. And thank you so much for listening to this tutorial. If you like this, please give a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in comment section. I will try to answer them. And for more, if you want to understand more about Pydantic, there is a really nice web page dedicated for Pydantic. Like you can see some examples and all the documentation and all these types, all these different validators and all these fields they have explained in depth. So you can check that out, and see you guys in the next video.